The morning light always seemed to arrive first at the edge of my porch, brushing across the wicker chair before touching anything else. As if the sun itself remembered where my husband used to sit. I still make his coffee, a half cup now, just for the scent of it. The sea has a way of holding memories the way it holds shells. Even when the tide pulls out, something always stays behind. That old beach house has been my anchor for more than 40 years. Every beam, every salt-worn shingle carries a fingerprint of our life. When the wind slips through the windows, it hums the tune he used to whistle, the one nobody but me would recognize anymore. Sometimes I think the house misses him too. I'd been expecting Laura and Ben for weeks. My daughter's visits had grown shorter over the years, spaced further apart, but this one was meant to be a proper stay. That's what she'd said on the phone, cheerful and brisk. I'd cleaned every corner twice and baked the lemon pie she always asked for as a girl. Funny how mothers remember every favorite thing long after their children forget. The day started softly. I walked barefoot across the porch, listening to the hush between the waves. The gulls were loud, the sky pale, the world exactly as it should have been. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that peace like that couldn't be touched. You ever notice how some days feel like a photograph before they even end? Everything's still, beautiful, but already fading. That morning was one of those. I trimmed the hydrangeas, watered the herbs, laid out fresh towels. Each small task was a conversation with the house, a reassurance that we were still taking care of each other. When you live alone long enough, you start to believe the walls listen back. Maybe they do. By noon, the sky had turned the color of steel. The wind carried a faint chill even though it was summer, the kind of coolness that slips under the door before a storm. I remember thinking the sea looked uneasy, restless, though the weather report had promised calm. I brewed a second pot of tea and set 3 cups on the table, a habit left from the days when my husband would always ask, expecting company, Maggie. He used to joke that I prepared for guests who might never arrive, but they were coming this time. I'd checked twice. When the tires crunched against the gravel drive, I felt that little spark of joy, the same one that used to flutter in my chest when Laura came home from college. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to the door. "Mom," she called, stepping out of the car, sunglasses perched high, that city brightness about her. Ben followed, carrying too many bags for a weekend. She looked lovely, thinner than before, though her smile seemed practiced, the kind of smile you wear for photographs or strangers. I told myself not to notice. They hugged me, quick and distracted, and I smelled that sharp perfume Laura wears now, expensive, distant. Ben's cologne lingered behind him like something trying too hard. "It's good to see you, Mom," she said, already glancing toward the porch. "It's good to be seen," I answered, and that made her laugh. Or maybe she only pretended to. Inside, everything was just as she'd left it. The faded curtains, the framed photo of her as a child holding her first seashell. She barely looked around. Ben set the suitcases by the door, then checked his phone. "Long drive?" I asked. "Not bad," he said, smiling too politely. "We made good time." His eyes didn't settle anywhere for long, always moving, scanning like someone measuring a space instead of admiring it. We had lunch on the porch. The pie sat between us, untouched for too long. Laura talked about work, traffic, things that filled silence but meant nothing. I nodded, asked questions, tried to catch the rhythm of her life, but every answer felt rehearsed. You can tell when someone's words have been practiced, can't you? The pauses give them away. Ben complimented the house, still standing strong, he said, tapping the wooden railing. "It's weathered worse," I replied. That earned me a look from Laura, quick, unreadable. Then she smiled again, too wide, too sweet. After lunch they went for a walk to stretch their legs. I stayed behind, clearing dishes. From the window I watched them stroll toward the beach, heads bent close together, their silhouettes blurred against the bright sand. 2 figures stitched together by some private thread I wasn't allowed to see. I told myself they were just talking, perhaps about work, or plans for the next holiday. But something inside me stirred, an old instinct I hadn't felt since my husband fell ill, that quiet warning bell that rings when life starts shifting beneath your feet. The house seemed to feel it too. A floorboard groaned where no one stepped. A window latch trembled, though the air was still, the kind of small noises that make you turn your head and whisper, "What was that?" When they returned, the wind had picked up. Laura brushed sand from her shoes. Ben checked his phone again. There was a message waiting, the tone sharp, and he slipped it back into his pocket too quickly. "Everything all right?" I asked. Just work, he said. The old lie, always the easiest one. That evening, we sat by the fire. The sea outside had turned rough, waves pounding like a heartbeat you couldn't calm. I tried to talk about the neighbors, about the new cafe in town, but Laura's eyes drifted to the window each time the wind howled. She seemed somewhere else. You can love someone your whole life and still not recognize the person they become when they're keeping a secret. When I went to make tea, I heard their voices behind me, low, urgent, the kind of whisper that sharpens the air around it. I caught only fragments, something about timing, and signing, and tomorrow. When I stepped back into the room, they both smiled too quickly. Ben said, "We were just planning the day tomorrow." I said, "Good, the tide's low in the morning, perfect for a walk." But inside, I knew the tide wasn't the only thing going out. That night the storm moved closer. The wind turned restless, pressing its palms against the windows like someone testing for weakness. I've always loved storms, the sound of them, the energy, but that one felt different. The air carried a charge, not of weather, but of worry. I tried reading before bed, but the words wouldn't settle. Every page reminded me of something unfinished. I listened instead. The waves, the clock, the muffled voices in the next room. Laura laughed once, short and nervous. Ben said something too low to catch. Then a drawer slid open. Paper rustled. A cupboard door closed. Maybe you've had that moment when your heart hears what your ears can't, when you know something is happening, even if you can't yet name it. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, remembering how my husband used to tell me, the sea never hides its secrets for long. By morning, the air had changed again. The world smelled of rain and salt and something else I couldn't place. Anticipation, maybe. I found Laura already dressed, pacing by the window with her phone. When she saw me, she slipped it into her pocket. "Sleep well?" she asked, too brightly. "Like a cat on a porch during thunder," I said, pouring coffee. "You?" "Fine," she replied, but her voice tripped over the word. Ben came in a few minutes later. Eyes heavy, a stack of papers half hidden in his hand. He set them on the counter, before realizing I'd seen. "Just work," he said again, smiling that careful smile people wear when they hope you won't ask questions. I didn't. Not yet. Breakfast was a quiet affair. The radio hummed old jazz, the kind my husband loved, but even that couldn't fill the silence. Laura pushed her toast around her plate. Ben checked his watch too often. Every time I looked up, one of them looked away. When they cleared the table, I noticed Ben slipped the papers into a leather folder, the kind with a lock. I almost asked what needed locking in my own house, but I bit my tongue. Some truths reveal themselves faster when you stop chasing them. The day dragged. They spent hours in the study, with the door closed, their voices low, rhythmic, like a conversation rehearsed too many times. I walked the beach instead, letting the cold wind pull at my scarf, the waves licking close to my shoes. The sea was dark that day, but honest, it always shows you its mood. When I came back, the house smelled faintly of printer ink and tension. They'd been busy. "Everything all right?" I asked again. Laura smiled, eyes too bright. "Just sorting through some old things, Mom." "You keep everything." "I do," I said. "Some things are worth keeping." She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. That evening, she joined me on the porch. The storm had passed, leaving a strange stillness. The sky stretched wide and empty, like it was holding its breath. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" she asked suddenly. "Leaving?" I repeated. "Why would I leave the one place that still remembers me?" "No reason," she said quickly. "Just wondering." She looked out toward the horizon, her face unreadable. The wind lifted her hair, and for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to chase shells across that same sand. I almost reached for her hand, but something in her posture stopped me. The distance between us wasn't measured in feet anymore. It was in unspoken words. Ben joined us later, carrying his laptop. He set it on the table and began typing, fingers moving with urgency. "Deadline," he muttered. I nodded, though the only deadlines in that house were the ones the sea decided. As dusk fell, I lit the lamps and put on a pot of stew. The smell filled the kitchen, comforting, familiar. They both said it was delicious, but neither finished their bowls. Their minds were somewhere else entirely. After dinner, Laura excused herself to make a call. I caught the faintest words as she stepped into the hallway. "Confirmation, tomorrow morning, signatures ready." My spoon froze midair. She closed the door behind her, the sound too gentle to trust. When she came back, her smile was fragile. "Everything okay, Mom? You look pale." "Just tired," I said, folding my napkin. "Maybe it's the weather." She kissed my cheek, a ghost of affection, and went upstairs. I sat there long after they'd gone to bed, listening to the house breathe. The clock ticked steadily, the sea murmured outside, and somewhere between the two, my heart began to whisper truths it didn't want to know. I walked to the window and looked out at the beach. The tide was slipping out again, leaving the sand smooth and wet under the moonlight. I thought about the years spent here, the laughter, the birthdays, the ordinary mornings that had built a life. Everything around me still belonged to that history. And yet, something had shifted. You can feel it, can't you? When the air inside your home doesn't feel like yours anymore. I glanced toward the hallway where the briefcase sat, closed tight beside Ben's coat. My reflection in the window looked back, older, yes, but not foolish. "They think I don't see," I whispered. "But I do." The sea answered with a crash against the rocks, loud and sure, as if to remind me that truth always finds a way to the surface. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll know. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the ache of suspicion, a calm resolve began to grow, quiet as the tide returning to claim what was always its own. The next morning broke sharp and silver, the kind of light that makes everything look honest whether you want it to or not. I could hear Ben in the kitchen before I even left my room drawers, sliding, papers shifting, the click of a laptop starting up. He was talking quietly on the phone, his voice pitched low. Words like contract and confirmation floated through the doorway. Quick as minnows, I stood in the hall, listening, heart steady but alert. When he heard me step onto the floorboards, he ended the call so fast, the silence nearly echoed. "Morning," he said, that too-wide grin back on his face. "Just checking the markets." The markets, he worked in insurance. The lie hung between us like steam. Laura came down moments later, cheerful again, but it was the brittle cheer of a woman rehearsing calm. "You're up early," she said, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve. "I always am," I answered. "The sea doesn't sleep in." She smiled tightly. "I suppose not." Breakfast was a formality. The clink of spoons against china filled the spaces where conversation should have been. When I mentioned taking them into town, Laura hesitated. "Maybe later," she said. "Ben's got some paperwork to finish, and I might help him." Paperwork, again that word. You ever feel your stomach drop for no clear reason? Like your body hears the truth before your mind does. I felt it then. By noon, the house hummed with tension. Every door opened and closed softly, like they were afraid to wake something. I moved through the rooms, pretending to dust, watching without watching. They occupied the study for hours, voices muted, printer running, once or twice the sound of a pen scratching fast. When I finally knocked to bring them tea, there was a pause before Laura called, "Just a sec, Mom." A shuffle, then the lock clicked open. The room smelled of toner and worry. Papers were spread across the desk, but one stack had been flipped upside down too quickly. I noticed the corner of a document stamped and read something official. "Busy morning," I said lightly, setting down the tray. "Just some forms for work," Ben said. "Work follows you everywhere these days," I replied. "Even to the sea." He chuckled, but his eyes didn't. When I left the room, I caught a reflection in the window. Laura, watching me go. Her face unreadable. Outside, the wind had shifted again. Clouds gathered low over the water, the horizon a straight, hard line. I stood on the porch, breathing the salt air, trying to clear the heaviness pressing against my ribs. I thought of my husband, of how he used to say, "People don't change, Maggie, they just forget who they meant to be." I wondered who my daughter meant to be now. The rest of the afternoon passed in fragments. The slam of a car door, a phone ringing unanswered, whispers that stopped when I entered. Once, I found Laura in my bedroom, staring at the framed deed on the wall, the one that marked the house as ours. She jumped when I spoke. "Looking for something?" She smiled too quickly. "Just admiring how organized you are, Mom." "Organization's just memory disguised as control," I said. "Helps me remember what matters." Her smile faltered. She left the room. Later, while I folded linens in the laundry room, I heard them arguing softly in the hallway. Her voice was urgent. "It has to be today, Ben. They're expecting confirmation." His reply was muffled but strained. "She find out." "She won't," Laura said. "Not until it's done." My hands froze around the sheet. "Not until it's done." I didn't move for a long time. The washing machine ticked quietly, steady as my heartbeat. When they finally left to run errands, I went into the study. The scent of printer ink still hung in the air. On the desk lay a single page they'd missed, half hidden beneath a magazine. I pulled it free. Property transfer, preliminary agreement. My name, their signatures. The words blurred for a moment, not from age, but from disbelief. They hadn't just thought about selling the house, they'd already begun. I folded the page, slipped it into my apron pocket, and sat down at the desk. The sea pounded faintly through the windows, each wave sounding like a heartbeat. I couldn't calm. You think you'll shout when you're betrayed, but you don't. You go still, completely still. When they came back that evening, I was on the porch, watching the horizon darken. Laura's hair was windblown, her expression tight. You okay, Mom? You look tired. Tired, I said softly. That's one word for it. Ben avoided my eyes. We got some groceries, he offered. Lovely, I replied. Put them wherever you like. My tone must have unsettled them because they moved quietly for the rest of the night, whispering less, avoiding my gaze. But beneath their careful manners, I could feel their urgency like two people racing a clock. When they went upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table with the folded document beside my teacup. I read it again, slowly this time, until the words no longer hurt. Then I smiled, because they didn't know something I did. They didn't know that years ago, after my husband's passing, I'd met with our lawyer and made quiet changes, the kind a woman makes when she's learned that love doesn't always protect you from life. The deed Laura saw framed on the wall wasn't the current one. The real papers, the binding ones, rested in a safe deposit box under my name alone. This house wasn't just in my name. It was part of a trust, untouchable, untransferable, and shielded from anyone who saw it as an asset. So when I smiled that night, it wasn't kindness, it was preparation. I stayed up long after their lights went out, listening to the creak of the boards above me. They moved softly, voices muted, drawers opening and closing. Once, I heard Laura whisper, "Tomorrow morning, before she wakes." I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. The dawn came pale and slow, the kind of morning when the sea looks like glass, and even the gulls seem hesitant to cry out. I stood by the window, mug in hand, watching them through the reflection. They were in the kitchen, hurried, nervous, Laura in her coat, Ben gathering documents. "You're up early," I said, stepping in. They both jumped. "Couldn't sleep," Laura said, forcing a laugh. "Same," I replied, leaning against the counter. "Something in the air, I suppose." Ben cleared his throat. "We have to head into town for a bit, just to sign some work things." Laura cut in quickly. I looked at her, long enough to make her eyes dart away. "Of course," I said. "Work things, always important." She nodded, her relief too obvious. "Do you want me to come along?" I asked casually. Her smile froze. "Oh no, that's okay, Mom. It's boring stuff." "I like boring stuff," I said softly. "Especially when it happens in my name." Silence. Ben tried to fill it with noise. "We'll be back by noon," he said, grabbing his keys. I watched them drive away, gravel spitting under the tires. Their car disappeared down the winding road that led to town, the same road my husband and I used to walk when we wanted to remind ourselves we were free. I stood there until the sound was gone. Then I went to the study, opened the drawer where they'd kept their files, and found the contract folder was missing. But the spare copy wasn't. Tucked underneath the desk mat was another document and signed, dated 2 weeks earlier. The same agency, the same buyer. Only one difference. This version included a bank account number, not mine. Theirs. The shock didn't come as anger, it came as clarity. My daughter hadn't been pressured into this, she'd been leading it. When the realization settled, I didn't cry. Instead, I walked to the mantel and traced my fingers along the frame of our wedding photo. My husband's smile met mine steady, knowing, "You always said, trust is earned, not inherited." I whispered, "Looks like we were right." I called my lawyer next. Mr. Jennings answered on the second ring, his voice calm, as always. "Mrs. Harper, what can I do for you?" "I think my daughter's about to sell a house she doesn't own," I said. He paused. "Do you need me to intervene?" "Not yet," I replied. "I just need you to be ready." "Of course," he said. "You sound remarkably calm. I've lived long enough to know storms pass faster when you don't chase them." After we hung up, I brewed another pot of tea and sat by the window. The sea was waking now, waves turning white at the edges. Each crash against the rocks sounded like applause from some unseen audience. Maybe it was just the world approving of patience. By noon, the car returned. They came inside with the forced brightness of people hoping to convince themselves everything was normal. How was town? I asked. Fine, Laura said, setting her bag down too quickly. Productive, Ben added. That's good, I replied, stirring my tea. Productivity keeps people out of trouble. Their smiles faltered. I motioned toward the table. Sit, we'll have lunch. They hesitated, then obeyed. I ladled soup into bowls, listening to the clink of their spoons. The air was thick with unspoken things. When Laura finally spoke, her voice trembled slightly. Mom, there's something we've been meaning to tell you. Is that so? I said. Yes. It's about the beach house. Ben glanced at her, nervous. Laura took a deep breath. We think it's time to make some changes. You've done so much keeping it up, and it's a lot for one person. We thought maybe it's time to let it go. Let it go, I repeated, like an old sweater. Her cheeks flushed. Don't be like that. We're thinking of your comfort. It's too much work for you. You mean too much work for you? I said softly. She blinked. What? Ben stepped in quickly. It's just practical, Mrs. Harper. The upkeep, the insurance, it all adds up. We found a buyer who really loves the property. It's sold. I asked that their silence answered for them. I leaned back, folded my hands. You've already done it, haven't you? Laura's voice was a whisper. It's not final yet, just paperwork. Paperwork, I said again. Seems that word follows you everywhere. Ben cleared his throat. We're trying to help, truly. You could move closer to town, have neighbors nearby, safer than my own home. I asked, or safer for your plans. No one spoke. The waves outside filled the space between us, steady and relentless. Finally, Laura said, You'll see, Mom. It's for the best. We're going tomorrow to meet the agent and finalize everything. Tomorrow, the same word I'd heard whispered through the walls the night before. I smiled, then not kindly, but knowingly. Well, I said, you'd better rest up for your big day. Laura blinked, surprised. You're not angry. Oh, I'm far beyond anger. Darling, I said, rising from the table. I'm just curious to see how it all plays out. And I walked out to the porch, letting the sound of the sea drown their confusion. Behind me, their murmured voices tangled with the wind. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they meant, because they didn't realize that by tomorrow, when they arrived at that meeting, they wouldn't be selling anything at all. Morning arrived with a deceptive kind of beauty, the kind that makes you forget storms ever existed. The sea lay still as glass, the horizon blushing faintly under the first touch of sunlight. For a fleeting moment, I almost believed peace had returned. But peace, I've learned, often comes right before something breaks. I was already dressed when Laura came down, her hair neatly tied, her expression unreadable. Ben followed, holding his briefcase like a soldier grips his weapon. The air in the room shifted the moment they entered. It wasn't conversation that filled it. It was purpose. Laura poured coffee with exaggerated calm. We should get going soon, she said. Going where? I asked, stirring my tea, though I already knew the answer. She hesitated, eyes flicking toward Ben. We told you yesterday, we have an appointment in town, with the buyer. The buyer, I repeated softly. You speak as though you own what you're selling. She didn't answer that, just kept her smile pinned like a brooch that didn't quite fit. Ben tried to keep his tone light. It's all but finalized. Once the papers are signed, you won't have to worry about maintenance or taxes ever again. I looked at him. You think I worry about taxes? He cleared his throat, glanced at Laura. It's just practical, Mrs. Harper. It's time. It's time. The phrase landed like a closing door. Laura took a deep breath, stepping closer. Mom, we're going tomorrow. I've sold your beach house. For a second, the world went perfectly silent. No waves, no birds, no wind, just those words hanging between us like smoke. I watched her, the daughter I'd held through fevers and heartbreaks, the same little girl who once cried when her sandcastle washed away. Now she was the tide that wanted to take the shore itself. You've sold my house, I said slowly, as though repeating it might change its meaning. Yes, she said softly. It's what's best for you, for all of us. For all of us, I echoed. And where do I fit in that us? Her lips trembled, but she steadied herself. You'll be comfortable. We found a retirement place beautiful, by the lake. You'll love it there. Everything will be taken care of. Everything except my choice, I said. Ben set his cup down too hard. Margaret, please. We're doing this to help. You can't manage this property alone anymore. It's not safe. There, it was the excuse that always makes betrayal sound noble. Not safe, I murmured. You mean, not convenient? Laura flinched. That's not fair. No, I said. What's not fair is deciding for someone who isn't gone yet. The words cracked something open in her. You don't understand. This house, this place, it's become too much. You're alone here, Mom. You could fall, or what? I asked quietly, or live too long for your plans. Her face drained of color. For a heartbeat, I saw guilt flash across her features. Then she masked it with defiance. You're twisting everything, she said. We only want what's right. I stood, the chair creaking softly behind me. What's right, I repeated. Funny how that word changes depending on who's using it. Ben reached for the briefcase. We have to leave, he said, his voice tight. We'll be late. Don't let me stop you, I said, stepping aside. They moved toward the door, but I wasn't done. Just remember, I added, the sea doesn't sign what it doesn't own. Laura hesitated, confused by the words, but Ben tugged her gently forward. Come on, he murmured. When the door closed, the house exhaled long and slow, like it had been holding its breath too. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, my tea cooling untouched beside me. It should have hurt more, but it didn't, because somewhere deep down, I had been expecting this moment all along. I walked through the rooms one by one, touching the things that had once defined my life, the photos, the old record player, the embroidered curtains I'd sewn with my husband. They had reduced all of this to a transaction. But these walls knew better. When the clock struck 9, I put on my coat and stepped outside. The air was brisk, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. I could smell the sea sharp alive, endless. My husband used to say, the ocean could wash anything clean. I hoped he was right. The walk to town was long, but it steadied me. Every crunch of gravel under my shoes reminded me who still owned this ground. By the time I reached the real estate office, I was ready. Through the glass door, I could see them, Laura and Ben, sitting across from a man in a navy suit. Papers lay spread across the table, pens poised, faces eager. I waited a moment, letting them feel safe in their illusion. Then I opened the door. The bell above it jingled softly. They looked up, startled. Mom, Laura said, half standing. What are you? I thought I'd come see what I'm selling, I said. The agent blinked, confused. Mrs. Harper, I nodded. Yes, the actual Mrs. Harper, the one whose name is on the deed you're holding. He glanced at Laura, then at Ben. I was told. I'm sure you were told many things, I interrupted gently. But here's one you should know. This property isn't for sale. Ben tried to speak, but his voice caught. Laura's hand trembled on the table. Mom, please don't make a scene. This isn't a scene, I said. It's a correction. I turned to the agent. You might want to check the registry. You'll find the title is held in a trust under my name alone. Any signatures provided by these two are legally meaningless. His eyes widened. He started flipping through his papers. But I have forged intentions, I said softly. Nothing more. Laura's voice broke. You went behind my back. I met her gaze, steady and calm. No, my dear. I simply stayed one step ahead. The agent stood, flustered. I think I need to make a few calls. Yes, I said, I think you do. Ben's face had gone pale. We were only trying to help me, I finished for him. Yes, I know. That's what everyone says before they take something that isn't theirs. Laura's tears came fast, real and raw. We didn't mean to hurt you. Hurt, I said softly. No, you didn't hurt me. You reminded me why I still need to protect what's mine. She reached out, but I stepped back. You sold memories for convenience, Laura. That's not love, it's laziness dressed as care. The room went still. Even the wind outside seemed to pause at the window. Finally, I turned to the agent again. I trust you'll destroy those documents immediately, he said, gathering the papers with shaking hands. I nodded, then looked back at my daughter, my child, who suddenly looked much younger and much smaller. Go home, I said quietly, and when you find it's not as comfortable as you expected, you'll understand what comfort really means. I walked out before she could answer. Outside, the sky had begun to drizzle soft, steady rain that smelled of salt. I lifted my face to it, letting it cool the heat in my chest. The sea roared faintly in the distance, and for the first time in a long while, I smiled, because they had sold nothing. I still had my house. I still had my name. And, most importantly, I still had my peace. When I returned home, I hung my coat by the door and made tea. The house greeted me with its familiar creaks and sighs, the same way it always had. I walked from room to room, whispering a thank you under my breath. Then, as I passed the hallway mirror, I caught my reflection older, steadier, but unbroken. You did well, I told her. You waited, and you watched. The woman in the mirror smiled back, and the sound of the sea outside answered her, steady as a promise. The storm had passed, but the air still hummed with its memory. I spent the next morning walking the perimeter of the garden, letting the damp grass cool my feet, watching the waves mend the scars they'd left in the sand. Peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. It seeps in through the cracks the chaos made. When I came back inside, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if it finally understood it was safe again. Laura and Ben were gone. They'd packed before dawn and driven away in silence. They didn't say goodbye. Perhaps they couldn't. I watched their car disappear down the bend in the road. And instead of sorrow, I felt something steadier, relief. You know, victory isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the sound of your own heartbeat steadying after too many sleepless nights. On the kitchen table lay the remains of yesterday's storm, a stray envelope, a forgotten pen, the faint indentation of where Ben's briefcase had rested. I traced my finger along the mark, then smiled. You thought you'd sold the tide itself, I whispered, but the sea doesn't sign away her name. That afternoon, I met with Mr. Jennings, my lawyer. He drove up in his old cream-colored sedan, the one that always looks ready to give up but never does like him. We sat on the porch with tea, and he listened while I recounted everything. He didn't interrupt, just nodded, eyes kind but sharp. You did exactly right, Mrs. Harper, he said when I finished. The trust structure holds. They couldn't have transferred a single grain of sand without your consent. I knew as much, I said, but I wanted them to learn it the hard way. He smiled faintly. Your husband would have been proud. He always believed foresight was the truest form of love. I looked out at the horizon where sea met sky, the colors blurring together like memory and present moment intertwined. He was the careful one, I said. When he fell ill, he made me promise to protect what we built, he said. People will come with good intentions and busy hands. Don't let them tidy you out of your own life. Mr. Jennings chuckled softly. Wise man, he was, I said, and practical. He left this house in a life estate trust mine till the day I leave it willingly. After that, it goes to the coastal charity in his name. That's what they never knew. He sipped his tea, and now they can't touch it. Shall I notify them formally? I shook my head. Not yet. Let silence do the teaching. He laughed a low, approving sound. Silence and paperwork, the best revenge. After he left, I walked through the house again. Every room seemed to glow in the late light the way things do when they've survived being claimed. I paused in the study, running my hand over the smooth edge of the desk. Beneath it, still tucked where I'd left it, was the envelope I'd prepared weeks ago, the updated deed, sealed and notarized, proof that the house would remain untouchable. I placed it in my dresser drawer, beside my husband's watch. It struck me then how easily this could have ended differently, how a few careless choices, a little more trust, could have cost me everything. Age has a way of teaching you that love doesn't excuse negligence. You can forgive your children for forgetting your birthday. You can't forgive them for selling your home. That evening, the sunset poured through the windows in gold ribbons. I made myself a simple supper and ate it on the porch, listening to the sea's slow applause against the rocks. Somewhere far off, thunder muttered one last goodbye. I thought about Laura not with anger now, but with a kind of mother's ache that never truly leaves. I wondered where they were, what excuses they'd be giving themselves. Guilt is a quiet companion. It never leaves your side once it finds you. I poured another cup of tea, the steam rising like ghosts of words unsaid. You'll remember someday, I said softly to the wind. You'll remember who built the walls you tried to sell. Inside, the phone rang, a sound that startled me in the stillness. I let it ring twice before answering. Mom, her voice, small, uncertain. I didn't expect to hear from you so soon, I said. Ivan and we wanted to make sure you're okay. I'm always okay, I replied. It's my nature. She hesitated. I suppose you spoke with Mr. Jennings. I did. A pause. Then you know. I know everything, Laura. Her breath caught on the other end. We didn't mean for it to go that far. I believe you didn't mean many things, I said gently. That doesn't make them undone. I'm sorry, I know. Silence stretched between us, tender but taut. Then she whispered, I don't know how to fix this. You start, I said. by not breaking anything else. She didn't answer, but I heard the soft sound of tears. Can I come home? This is your home, I said. But maybe let the sea forgive you first. It's better at it than I am. She sniffed, whispered goodbye, and hung up. I sat for a long while afterward, listening to the dial tone fade into nothing. It wasn't triumph I felt then, it was peace, the kind that follows when the truth finally settles in the right hands. The next morning dawned bright and steady, the sky rinsed clean from the storm. I opened every window in the house and let the sea breeze wander through the rooms. It carried the scent of salt and renewal, wrapping around the curtains like a promise kept. For the first time in months, I felt the house breathe easily again. You know, people think victory is about shouting or slamming doors, but real victory sounds like this, like quiet air moving through a space you refuse to surrender. After breakfast, I walked down to the beach. The tide was high, glittering in the sun. The sand cooled beneath my feet. Each wave rolled forward, erased itself, and began again, ever tired, never asking permission. I smiled. The sea doesn't apologize for taking up space, neither should I. I carried a small wooden box with me, the one my husband carved years ago. Inside it were the first set of house keys we'd ever owned together, their metal dulled by time but still solid, still true. I knelt near the water's edge, scooped a shallow hole, and buried the box there beneath the wet sand. For safekeeping, I whispered, in case the world forgets who this house belongs to. The water crept up, kissed the sand, and covered the spot as if sealing a pact. When I turned back toward the house, it glowed against the horizon, white siding, blue shutters, defiant against time. It wasn't just wood and paint, it was memory anchored in place, and now protected beyond reach. Later that day, Mr. Jennings called again. Everything's settled, he said. The agency has withdrawn their claim. I doubt you'll hear from them or your daughter about the sale again. I doubt it too, I replied, though I imagine I'll hear from Laura in another way. He hesitated. You're very gracious, Mrs. Harper. Not many could handle betrayal with such poise. I've weathered worse than paperwork, I said, and storms always pass. After the call, I brewed tea, sat on the porch, and watched the gulls dance over the surf. The horizon shimmered like liquid gold. My husband's words echoed faintly. The sea never hides its secrets for long. He'd been right. It hadn't hidden this one. Either it had simply waited for me to see it clearly. That afternoon, the mail arrived. Among the envelopes was one addressed in Laura's handwriting. I turned it over for a moment before opening it. The note inside was short. Mom, I can't undo what I did, but I hope one day you'll remember who I was before this. I've taken a new job inland. Maybe it's time I learned what home really means. Love, Laura. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it beside my husband's photo. There was no anger left in me, just a soft ache, the kind you feel when a wound finally begins to heal. As evening settled, the house filled with amber light. Shadows stretched long across the floor, familiar and gentle. I poured myself a glass of wine, raised it toward the empty chair beside me, and whispered, "We did it, love. We kept it safe." The wind rustled the curtains as though answering. I leaned back, letting the rhythm of the waves blend with my breath. Beneath everything, beneath loss, beneath betrayal, there was gratitude. Gratitude for the strength I didn't know I still had. Gratitude that wisdom, once earned, never truly fades. In the distance, I saw a small boat gliding across the water. It sailed bright against the fading sun. I thought of Laura again, and a quiet wish bloomed inside me that one day she'd find her own kind of stillness. The kind that doesn't come from control, but from surrender. Because that's the real hidden truth, isn't it? That peace doesn't come from winning, it comes from no longer needing to. I stayed there until the first stars appeared, blinking softly above the dark line of the sea. The air grew cooler, and somewhere nearby, a lighthouse began to hum its steady light. The world felt whole again. As I closed the door for the night, I whispered to the house, "You're safe now." The boards creaked softly in reply, as if saying, "So are you." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. For weeks after the confrontation, the phone stayed quiet. No calls, no messages, just the soft hum of distance doing its work. Silence can wound sharper than any argument, and I let it do the talking for me. Each morning, I rose before dawn, brewed tea, and walked the shoreline. The sea no longer sounded like warning, it sounded like applause. Every wave seemed to whisper, "You did right to wait." When people betray you, they expect a storm. They don't know what to do when they meet calm instead. The neighbors noticed their absence. Mrs. Kendall from 2 doors down leaned over the fence one afternoon and asked, "Your daughter not visiting anymore?" "Not for a while," I said. "She's finding her own way." She nodded, thoughtful. Sometimes distance teaches better than advice. Exactly, I thought. Distance was the lesson Laura and Ben had earned. I didn't block their numbers. I wanted the silence to sit there like an open door they were too ashamed to walk through. Once, late at night, I saw Laura's name flash on the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. The next morning, a text appeared. "I'm sorry." I typed a single word back. "Rest," nothing more. That one word did what 1,000 arguments never could. It put the weight where it belonged. Days passed. The seasons began to turn. The house, once filled with the tension of their schemes, now hummed with peace. I fixed the garden gate, repainted the shutters, and hosted my book club ladies again. They noticed the difference before I said a word. "You look lighter," one of them said. "I finally dusted," I replied with a small smile. "Some things you have to clear out properly." They laughed, not knowing the half of it. But revenge, my kind of revenge, doesn't arrive with shouting or lawyers. It arrives quietly, in the form of a newspaper clipping or a chance encounter that lets the truth find its own audience. One chilly afternoon, I went into town for groceries. Near the cafe, I heard 2 familiar voices behind me. Ben's laugh forced, brittle. Laura's softer, carrying a tremor I hadn't heard before. I stepped aside, unseen behind the shop's ivy-covered wall. They were sitting on the bench outside the real estate office, his shoulders slumped, her face pale. On the window behind them, a large sign read "Position, Vacant Property Agent, Wanted." Their agent, the man who'd helped them forge the sale, had been dismissed. Word travels fast in a small town. It seemed when the truth about the fake sales surfaced, his reputation collapsed with it. And gossip does what justice can't. It spreads. I didn't gloat. I just watched them sit there. 2 people who had mistaken love for leverage. Ben's hand reached for hers. She didn't take it. When I turned to go, Laura's gaze lifted by chance, our eyes meeting for the briefest heartbeat. She froze. I smiled, slow, calm, not cruel. "Just a reminder, I see you. I survived you." Then I walked away. That evening, as I set dinner on the porch, the sky was streaked with crimson. I remembered something my husband once told me: the best revenge is living long enough to watch them learn. He hadn't been a cruel man, just a realist. Life has a way of circling back. The next morning, a letter slid under my door. No postage, just handwriting trembling on the envelope. From Laura. Inside was a single sheet. "We lost everything trying to get what was already yours. Ben's left. I've taken work in the city. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say thank you for reminding me who you are. Maybe I'll remember who I was." No request, no plea, just truth. That was enough. I placed the letter beside her first one, beneath the photo of her as a child holding a seashell larger than her head. She'd grinned so wide then, pure, unbroken faith in the world. I whispered, "You'll find her again someday." The days slipped into routine. I joined a pottery class, started volunteering at the Lighthouse Preservation Fund. People half my age asked how I managed the stairs. "Stubbornness," I said, "and good shoes." But inside, I carried something rarer than pride. Stillness. Revenge had finished its work and left peace behind. That's the secret. They look like opposites, but they're just 2 parts of justice at different temperatures. A month later, I received a call from the local paper. They wanted to feature the house in a heritage column, the oldest surviving family cottage on the cliff. "Would you be willing to be photographed?" the reporter asked. "Of course," I said. It's time the right story got told. When the article came out, the headline read, "Keeper of the Coast, Widow Protects Family Home from Fraud Attempt." They never named Laura or Ben, but the town didn't need names. People understood, and I didn't correct the story where it called me a woman of quiet iron. It fit. After the piece ran, flowers appeared on my porch, some from neighbors, some anonymous. Among them was one small bouquet of wild daisies with no card. I knew exactly who they were from. That night, I placed those daisies in a vase by the window, right where the moonlight touched them. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means you stop waiting for the echo of an apology and start listening to your own heartbeat again. I slept better after that. Weeks later, on a clear Sunday morning, I stood on the porch with my tea and watched the gulls glide low over the waves. The house creaked contentedly behind me. Everything was as it should be. You know, Age teaches you that revenge doesn't need witnesses. The sweetest part is when you realize you don't even need to tell the story, the world tells it for you. I took a slow sip, tasting salt on the rim of the cup. The same salt that once stung when I cried, now only flavored peace. I thought of my daughter, somewhere inland, learning what the absence of the sea feels like. Maybe that was punishment enough. Maybe that was mercy. As the sun climbed, the tide rose again, inching closer to the buried box of keys. I smiled. Someday, maybe long after I'm gone, the sea will uncover it. Someone will find it, wonder about the life it belonged to, and the story will start all over again. Another woman, another choice, another kind of strength. But for now, it's enough to stand here, alive, unbroken, and certain. The world took its turn, and I took mine back quietly, completely, without a single raised voice. And that, my dear, is how revenge sounds when it's done properly, like the sea, calm on the surface, and unstoppable underneath. It began with a whisper of wind against the shutters, the kind that sounds almost like someone exhaling your name. The morning light had that milky softness that makes every corner of a house look a little like memory. I'd been up for hours, though I hadn't done much, just walked from room to room, touching the frames, the furniture, the quiet. I'd decided it was time to write the letter, not because I was going anywhere soon, but because peace, once found, deserves to be preserved in ink. At the kitchen table sat a stack of cream stationery I'd been saving for years. Beside it, a pen that once belonged to my husband. I ran my fingers along its worn barrel, feeling the grooves where his thumb used to rest. Funny, the things that outlive us, sometimes they carry our pulse better than we ever could. The sea outside moved lazily, each wave curling like a sentence, taking its time. I opened the first sheet, took a breath, and began. My dearest Laura, if you're reading this, it means you found the courage to come home, not to ask for forgiveness, but to remember who you were before everything got tangled in fear and ambition. The words came easier than I expected. I paused only to listen to the kettle whistling softly behind me, that old song of routine. I poured tea, let the steam fog my glasses, and went back to writing. When you were little, you used to run barefoot on this porch, shouting that you could race the wind. I never stopped you. I wanted you to believe that life could be outrun. I suppose that's what every mother wants, to see her child moving faster than pain can catch her. But time has its own rhythm, and one day you'll learn that the real race isn't against loss, it's toward understanding. That's where I'm standing now. Love, not angry, not broken, just here. I stopped then and looked around the room. The house felt almost like it was listening. Maybe it was. Old houses do, that they remember. The photograph of my husband on the mantel caught the sunlight just right, his eyes gleaming with that same quiet amusement he'd always worn when he knew I was doing something sentimental. Don't smirk, I whispered. I'm allowed one letter. And the waves answered with a small, affectionate hush. I continued. I know the world taught you that security is something you earn, not something you're given. But here's the truth your father wanted you to know. Love that's earned through deception isn't love, it's debt. And debt never lets you sleep easy. I saw you and Ben walking away that day, and for a heartbeat, I wanted to run after you. But mothers must sometimes love from a distance. I chose to stand still and let silence teach. You see, forgiveness doesn't always mean opening the door again. Sometimes it means leaving the light on so the other person can find their way when they're ready. The pen paused again. My hand trembled slightly, but it wasn't weakness, it was the weight of tenderness, the kind that aches in the best way. Outside gulls were circling low over the beach. The tide was pulling back, revealing the darker sand beneath, the kind that glistens like secrets laid bare. I thought of her as a child again, the way she'd hold my hand until the very last second before letting go to chase the surf. She'd always look back once, just once, to make sure I was still there. I always was, and in some way, I still am. I wrote on, if I've learned anything, it's this. People fail each other, but places remember. This warehouse has forgiven you already. The floorboards that carried your footsteps, the walls that held your laughter, they've been waiting, not for an apology, but for the sound of you humming again. Come when you can. Don't bring explanations, just bring yourself. There will be tea, and there will be quiet. And maybe that's enough. I signed it simply. Love always, Mom. Then I folded the letter carefully, slid it into an envelope, and wrote her name across the front. My handwriting has grown shakier over the years, but her name still looked beautiful. It always did. I carried it upstairs to the study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I opened the top drawer of my desk right beside the framed photo of our family. On the parent placed the envelope inside. Beneath it, I tucked the spare house key, wrapped in a piece of ribbon she'd once tied in her hair. There, I murmured. Now she always have a way back. The day drifted on quietly. I spent the afternoon tending to the garden, trimming the roses that had finally started to bloom again. It's strange plants forgive neglect so easily. Give them light, give them time, and they'll surprise you with their resilience. I think people are much the same. As twilight approached, the sky blushed pink and gold, the way it always does when the world is trying to make amends for another day gone too fast. I sat on the porch with my tea and let the hush of evening settle around me. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps on the path, a rhythm I hadn't heard in months. The crunch of gravel, hesitant but familiar. I turned, heart steady. Laura stood at the gate. She didn't wave, didn't speak. She just looked at me, tears glinting in the fading light. I didn't move either. Words would have broken the moment. After a while, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small box, the one I'd buried months ago by the tide, the one with the old keys. She must have found it washed up along the shore. She held it up, a small smile trembling on her lips. I think the sea wanted me to bring this back, she said softly. I nodded. It always returns what matters. She walked up the steps slowly, like someone approaching a memory she wasn't sure was still hers. When she reached the porch, she stopped beside me. I didn't take her hand. Not yet, but I didn't move away either. For a long time, we just listened to the sea, the wind, the quiet forgiveness blooming between us. And in that silence, I felt something lift. Not the weight of betrayal that had already gone, but the last layer of grief, thin as dust, finally brushed away. We went inside together as the first stars appeared, their light flickering softly against the windows. She noticed the letter almost immediately. What's this? She asked. Something for you to read when you're ready, I said. Her eyes filled again, but this time they weren't heavy with regret, they were full of understanding. She nodded, placed the envelope against her heart, and whispered, "Thank you." We didn't talk much after that. Some stories, once healed, don't need retelling. We just sat by the fire, sipping tea, letting warmth speak in place of words. Later, as she slept on the couch, I looked at her, my daughter, my once lost, tightened, smiled. The house seemed to hum softly, its old heartbeat steady again. Outside, the sea whispered against the shore, tireless and forgiving. I whispered back, "We're all right now." And I meant it. And maybe that's the quiet lesson tonight, dear friends, that sometimes the loudest kind of love is silence. Margaret didn't need revenge to win. She needed grace to rest. Because the truth is, peace doesn't come from holding on. It comes from letting go with dignity. If this story touched you, hold it close tonight. And remember, every home has a heartbeat, and every heart has a story worth protecting. I'll see you again soon, with another tale from the corners of life, where love lingers, even after the storm.